All right, folks. Welcome everybody to the recruiting show here for Irish Sports Daily. Wanted to mention if you're not a member of Irish Sports Daily, you can go to the front page and click on the premium section and sign up. There'll be obviously all this type of information plus a whole lot more. We've got spring practice happening right now, and if you're not a member of Irish Sports Daily, it's a great time to sign up. Also, if you're new to the YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe and click the like button. That certainly helps us too, and allows you that to know that hey, we're on or we have new videos up. So make sure you do that if you're new to the new Irish Sports Daily channel. If you have already done it, that's fine too. So, uh, Chris, I wanted to yeah, I wanted to kind of start off the show today, and let's talk a little bit about the numbers at this point. When you look at the situation right now, they're at 19 total commitments, and I haven't asked anybody recently. I don't know whether you have or not, but have you heard anything about a number that they're kind of shooting for at this point?
So the last time I talked to a guy about numbers, he said, "Shoot, I'm just going to try. We just want to take as many good players as possible, and then figure it out as it gets later on down the road." I think kind of the number that you can base off of is 25. That's kind of like just the yearly number about to try to get, and then obviously you're going to have guys. A guy or two may shake loose. Guys can get injured. Guys can go in the transfer portal. Guys can elect not to come back for their fifth year. That's what makes the number really so fluid as you go through it. But I think 25-ish is maybe just kind of like their the number they'll kind of go off of, and then maybe try to squeeze in a little bit more. But this is real far in advance now. The first time in a while, I've heard them say, we're just going to try to take as many good players as we can, and then figure it out after.
Yeah, I think when I look at the situation, I think it's a pretty good situation in that they clearly have the number that they're looking for right now in 19. That's a lot. That's more than really anybody has at this point, and I think they've done a pretty good job of addressing most of the needs at this point. But Chris, when you look at the situation, I've been kind of going through it. You've got your quarterback. You've got a couple running backs. You've got three wide receivers. You got a tight end. You got three offensive linemen. You've got kind of an interior guy. You got a couple defensive ends and some linebackers. Three linebackers at this point. You've got one corner and two safeties. When you look at this, what do you think is important at this point? What did they need to, I guess, address here? What is left for this class?
So I think it might not be what they need in terms of quantity, but I think everyone or a lot of people would agree one of, if not the biggest target left on the board is Derek Meadows at receiver. They really, really need some star power at that position. They've circled him. He's been the guy they've targeted for about a year now. I mean, since Irish Invasion last June, and they've done a phenomenal job of building that relationship and putting themselves in position where they appear to be the leader for him. Obviously, they got a few receiver commits right now, but none the caliber or kind of the size and bring what Derek Meadows will bring. Then if you look after that, you're really looking at the defensive backfield. They really, really, really want to get Mark Zachary, the cornerback from Indianapolis. They really, really, really want to land Dallas Golden, the athlete from Florida. And then the other guy they really have their eye on is safety Jadon Blair, who's actually on campus right now. He's a safety from North Carolina. Notre Dame stands a really good chance. I really like where they stand with Meadows. I really like where they stand with Zachary. I really like where they stand with Golden. And I like where they stand with Jadon Blair, but I would put him a peg lower than those other guys. He's on campus right now, like I said. Penn State, that's a school that's probably going to be, they're going to be battling with to the end. Maybe Penn State had the edge coming into the visit, but he's on campus now for parts of 4 days, really. He arrived on campus on Wednesday. He won't leave till Saturday late afternoon. And I know Notre Dame was really, really confident they're going to knock it out of the park with him. So we'll see how that changes. But, those four guys are kind of the ones that really, really people should be really focusing on.
I think that that's important, certainly, and you know, when you look at the situation, um, corners are really really important. They have Cree Thomas already, a guy that's committed. Some people feel like you know, he may end up at safety, but he's being recruited as a corner, and I think he can play that position if that's where they choose to play him. But I think Zachary and Dallas Golden are so very very important to this class. They have to land both of them. There's certainly other players that they're recruiting that are corners. But I think they have the best shot with those two guys at this point right now. So to me, that I think that they're important, and of course, Meadows is really just extremely critical at this point. And you just have to hope um, that some of the, you know, somehow the situation turns out where they can land, you know, a few more guys. I do think even if they get Meadows, I still think you need another wide receiver. They may not believe me or think like I do. Um, but I look, Chris, in today's transfer portal world, what does it matter? You know, what does it matter? These guys are going to be gone in no time. Whoever isn't playing is going to leave, and I think you're going to see that even more this year. You know, we saw Clarence Lewis just dump, you know, right out of spring ball and just said, "Well, I don't see an opportunity here, so I better just get out and start looking for my next opportunity." And I think you're going to start seeing that more and more because kids just aren't going to remain patient. And so uh, I like Notre Dame's attitude that, hey, we're just going to keep taking players. And I think that's a great idea. Let's just see if they actually do that because there's a lot of guys that they have a legit, you know, a legit shot at right now. You know, obviously Javian Boggs was a guy who's committed to Ohio State. He's going to come up. Brandon Finney recently visited. Tyler Taylor's, you know, considering visiting. They've had Raiden Vines Bright come up. I don't know if they're really in that mix at this point. There's certainly some other wide receivers that they're looking at. You know, there's obviously some big time defensive linemen still that are on the board. They're all bigger kind of defensive ends and Javion Campbell, Darren Kinnabong, Juju Marks is probably still in the mix a little bit. And then they just had Noah McCall came up for a visit. Gavin Nix just came up for a visit. You know, they're still very much in the mix for Madden Ferramo. And then, you know, there's a lot of guys that they're still up. You know, Chuck McDonald, I like his film. I think he's a really talented player. When you look at the visit list, obviously this weekend, you know, they like we said, they had Noah McHale came up. Jadon Blair's there. Brandon Hoke came up as well. Didn't get an offer, but somebody, he's a wide receiver that they're looking at. And then, of course, Brady Hart, Thomas Davis Jr., Tristan Phillips, DJ Williams. Those are all 26 guys. But now that some of these guys have just recently visited, what can you tell us about some of these guys? I mean, where do you think Notre Dame stands with some of these guys, especially the early 2026 guys that have come up recently and guys like Noah McHale and guys still left on the board that Notre Dame is interested in?
So the first name that pops out to me when you ran down, you know, some of that list, that partial list, is Gavin Nix, right? He's the IMG linebacker. Notre Dame offered him a long time ago. He came up and visited last April when he was making a big, huge tour. And, you know, he's a kid that has dozens of offers, so Notre Dame got in the mix. But, you know, it's hard to say how, you know, serious they were. And I had heard, I know some people close to him, that Notre Dame was a school he was serious about. And as we mentioned before, you know, Marcus Freeman and Al Golden and Max Buller, they all kind of really picked up the intensity of recruiting him at the turn of the year here. He reciprocated. He really enjoyed, he liked hearing that, came up for a visit last week, and Notre Dame crushed it. I mean, you know, you can tell when you're talking to kids, you know, if they're going to really understand what Notre Dame is all about. And just from talking to him, you knew it. I mean, he told me right away, he's like, man, we've talked about football plenty. I've been talking about football, those guys, for a year. I wanted to come up to see if the 440 was legit, to see what the opportunities for life after football were. And when someone says that coming into a visit, and then they were just he was just blown away coming out of it, that really kind of shows a serious interest. You know, Gavin made it very clear he loved it. People I talked to on Notre Dame side thought they killed it. People I talked to close to Gavin, you know, confirmed basically everything. And he's a kid. I think he's going to take an official back in June with his family. He just went to Ohio State. I think he has an Oregon visit coming up. I think his mom, he wants to get his mom back maybe in June for an official visit. Said he might have a decision even before then. And he's already talking about coming back in November for the Florida State game. So that kind of shows you how serious he is. Noah McHale, he's the 2025 linebacker from California that you mentioned. He just visited the other day. This was like his third unofficial visit to Notre Dame all the way from California. Visited twice last year and was back again. So there's some interest there. I'm not quite sure that Notre Dame's at the top of the list at this point, and I think they're kind of running out of time in order to get there. You mentioned Brandon Finney. He's the receiver. Guy Notre Dame really, really likes. You talked about if they take Meadows, maybe they'll end up, maybe they should take one more. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll end up. I know Finney is a guy they really, really like. And he really enjoyed it. So you mentioned Raiden Vines Bright, kind of the other end of the spectrum. I know it seems like we always say every recruit loved his visit. I don't know if Raiden loved it or not. I just got the feeling coming out of it that Notre Dame wasn't going to be a really, really in the mix there for him. And then, obviously kind of the talk of the last couple of weeks was the 2026 quarterbacks that have been in with Brady Hart and Noah Grubbs, specifically Troy Hune as well. Those two guys are the guys I think, Noah Grubbs and Brady Hart, to really keep an eye on as we move going forward here. We'll probably talk about them again later. But yeah, those are some of the guys. You mentioned Braden Hope. He's a kid that, he's just now, he got the St. Thomas Aquinas. He's transferred there in January. A lot of people are expecting to see him kind of really emerge on the national radar at a school like that. Notre Dame, like you said, they didn't offer him while he was in town, but they made it clear they were going to come and check him out. And obviously, as a senior, he's not a kid that they're saying, hey, let's see how you do this fall. They're not going to have time for that. So they're going to be down there this spring, really, really paying attention and evaluating him. And for a kid that's that far along in the process, if he's coming up on an unofficial without an offer from Notre Dame, if they offer, he's going to take that really, really seriously.
All right, that's enough of us kind of rambling on here. This show is about you, the, I guess, viewer, and I know you got a lot of questions. And so if you're in the chat and you have some questions, feel free to ask us. We've got some questions already. Fire them away. That's what we're here for. We're here to answer your questions. We want to make the recruiting show, excuse me, more of a kind of a, audience participation type of thing. So we'll certainly talk about some things that we think are relevant to start the show each week, but what we want to do is just get you more and more involved. So the more questions you have, we'll be more than happy to answer them and go from there. All right. First question we have here, Christian, how on God's green earth did Notre Dame not recruit and miss out on Coy Parrish, a Catholic ethnic blue-collar kid from Iron Range in Minnesota? The kid is incredible. What do you think there, Christian?
Well, I mean, yeah, he obviously is. He stood out big time, and once he got a real giant national platform, really made a name for himself. And I just think at the time, Notre Dame just kind of had other guys higher on the board. They're not going to be able to go after every guy. I think this staff, one thing you can give them a lot of credit for is I really like their mix of top guys, high 4-star, 5-star guys we're going after. And then also saying, hey, here's this guy we discovered. Nobody else is in on him right now. We don't care. Whether that's Derek Meadows, for example. I mean, if you watch Derek Meadows, it wouldn't shock you that he would merge into a national caliber prospect. But Notre Dame offered him when he wasn't that. And he really wasn't that, having all those offers until January. Teddy Rizak's a guy from Nebraska. You look at Jordan Faison, who they kind of, however you want to say, lucked into basically on his lacrosse. But they went after his brother Dylan, and they offered him, and he committed the next day. So, and they're confident. That's his first offer ever. And you got to know, if you're offering Jordan Faison's little brother, knowing what the family thinks about Notre Dame, that there's a good chance he's going to commit. He did. And he's a kid I would not be surprised to see blow up here his junior year. So
he's a good player.
Yeah, they do a good, they're going to miss some guys. They're not going to get every guy. I don't think, Coy was a Luke Kuechly situation where he was beating down the doors to come to Notre Dame and they said no. So can't be too upset about that one.
Yeah, you mentioned again the Faison kid, and I love that kid. I think he's going to be a really good player. I think he's even better than his brother. I think he's got a higher upside than his brother, and his brother certainly is proven as a true freshman walk on. He can come in and play at this level. I think his brother's going to be even better when it's all said and done. I think he's going to be bigger, certainly, and I think he's faster already. And once he kind of develops a little bit, I think he's going to get even faster than that. So all right, we've got some more questions here. What's up with Damian Shanklin? Um, yeah, I'd say it's kind of a Jack Lang situation. It's a situation where you have to do everything you can to make sure that you can get into Notre Dame, and so I think that that's probably the situation as much as anything. It kind of sucks because I think he's a really good player. I think he's a really talented player, but at this point, it may be difficult for them to, to get together, and we'll see what happens. So,
I kind of kicked myself on this one, right? Because if when Shanklin first came onto the scene, it was real quick that everyone was predicting him to go to Notre Dame, and I was like, man, that just seems so fast. I'm not buying that just yet. Nice kid, but he just hadn't had a ton of like other things going around, like other offers, other visits, and like it just seemed like this might be too quick. And eventually, I kind of came around to the same camp of like, oh yeah, because people told me that if he had to choose today, in the winter, it'd be Notre Dame, but it's too early. And I should have picked up on the whole "it's too early"
yeah,
thing, because Notre Dame, if they wanted him, so if it wasn't too early for them, they should have gone after him. If it wasn't too early for him, he should have pulled the trigger. So I kind of kicked myself a little bit for not sussing that out.
it is what it is, and again, I don't know all the facts, and I don't think anybody knows all the facts. But at this particular point, I think that that's kind of what we're looking at here, based off of things I hear allegedly. So we'll just have to see what happens. Whether that changes down the road or not, and again, I think Lang's in the same boat. Is he completely out? I don't think so, but at the same time, we've known for a long time that this is an issue, and so we'll just have to see what happens and go from there. Um, let's see. I'm looking for some more questions. Does anybody remember when Mike used to take calls on his Power Hour show? I sure did. We used to have a lot of fun with that, but I don't know. It's just I love that. I love that show. It was a lot of fun. But when I moved, all the guys that I did that with are still in Indiana and still doing their thing. So, all right. I remember Mike playing a song and a mime by Brian Jones Massacre. I love that song. Well, Brian Jones Massacre is great. Absolutely love him. Mike, is REM still the greatest band ever? No, and they never have been. I like REM, but I'm not. I've never said they're the greatest band ever. I've always liked REM quite a bit, but yeah, not the greatest band ever. Chris, who is the greatest band ever?
Greatest band ever. I mean, you'd probably have to say like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, right?
I think a lot of people would say that. Yeah, I think a lot of people would say that for sure. The Beatles would probably be pretty hard to top. Not, I mean, it wouldn't be my favorite band of all time, but it's hard to argue with their success. That's for sure. And I'm a big Beatles fan. I own every record, so it's not that big.
So you would then you're the music guy, so you probably have some niche band that plays in the parking lot at some place in Omaha on Thursday nights. You think is the greatest band ever?
No, 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 no. I mean, there's there's a lot of bands like that I like and everything, but I don't know. I don't even know who I would think would be the greatest band ever. Um, for me, I'd say I guess my top would certainly be Pixies. I'm a huge Tom Petty fan. I love Neil Young. I'd say the band, the band. Those are probably some of my very very favorites for sure. All right, I gotta believe there's some more questions here. We haven't seen enough though. I'm looking here. So if you have questions, please ask us, and we'll be more than happy.
I see Littleton Ward. He's a guy I met down in San Antonio. I was watching his son, Elijah Ward, 2026 quarterback in Kentucky, who was working out down at the combine down there and did his thing down there. And I know his son has I think he has an early Louisville offer, maybe a couple more. He's really been working. Hit the best of the Midwest camp. He wants to know if Notre Dame will take a chance on a kid like that. We talked. I know you guys are headed up to camp this summer. That's where to go when you're at that age, to go to camp, try to catch their eyes.
Oh yeah,
That's what can happen.
absolutely. Question is Antoine Deslar. How do you spell Delaris? How do you pronounce that
Delor
last name?
Delorier.
Delorier. Is he out of the picture now? I don't know. I'd probably guess so, because they've taken so many bigger linebackers, and a lot of the guys they have on their board are kind of more bigger linebackers, that they want to take. So I would guess, unless something changes, we'll have to see. But I think he's probably a little further back on the list. I think there's a couple guys that they'd like to add beforehand. But I do think that they like his potential and think he's a pretty good player. So I don't know. This is
Hard to
interesting.
overstate how shocked they were about the Saka thing, right? They didn't see that coming, and a lot of times, I'll say, Notre Dame has a real good feel about this. Mark Zachary's a case in point where, a lot of people are all over the map, but Notre Dame's been on that the whole time, exactly where he's been. And it was kind of surprising to me that they were, they would fall off Saka. Every time he came up to visit, they were like, man, this kid is he's a real Notre Dame fit. I think we got a better chance than we thought. Basically, every time he visited. But then after that kind of wore off, they're like, people are like, he's going to Ohio State, or he's going to Alabama. Of course, in the beginning, everyone thought he was going to Penn State. I had a pretty good chat with Anthony right before he announced his commitment. And, Notre Dame was always that one school versus the other. The other schools were the ones that changed, never Notre Dame. So it just,
yeah, that's the one he was comparing Notre Dame to everybody else. Is
for sure.
Yeah,
exactly. And it wasn't a thing where he was looking for a reason not to go to Notre Dame, right? Like he probably came into the, maybe not him, but most people came in thinking he would go to Penn State where his dad played. So Notre Dame zoomed their way up that list, and then they fought everybody else off. I know, obviously he's been being recruited for a long time. So when Laurinaitis left, people thought he could lose him to Ohio State. And he just told me when Alabama came in, it was just something he had to consider. But he doesn't strike me as an Alabama type kid anyways. So I'm kind of surprised Notre Dame didn't think they had as good of a shot as they did and ended up doing in the end.
Linebackers are different cats too. In my experience, they're just kind of they're a lot like offensive linemen. There's no fanfare there. They don't. Most of them usually don't get too involved in the recruiting hype. They're just kind of dudes. They just don't get really wrapped up in a lot of that type of stuff. Most of them,
him especially.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why sometimes it's hard to read what's going on with some of these guys. And I think a lot of the types of linebackers that Notre Dame recruits, that's very, very true. Where maybe some of the national guys, they're a little bit more hype or whatever. But I think for the guys that end up choosing Notre Dame, that's very much the case. So,
and I had a good conversation with one of his coaches leading up to it. He mentioned, the fact that he was such a high profile kid as a freshman. Like people had already pegged him as like a next guy. And at that time he was a safety and people were thinking he'd be Kyle Hamilton type player. But he had already had the fanfare and playing at a place like St. Joe's, they're playing on ESPN. And so the hoopla kind of hit him early and he kind of, shrugged it off. And by the time you get to this point, it's kind of old. And his father played a big role in it too. I mean, I asked him about that and he said, well, I get it from my dad. He said, when I told my dad I committed, he said, good job, gave me a handshake, and that was it. So there's no fanfare in that house.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because all those guys who have been through it before, they know.
This doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at this point. Yeah. And all the rankings and all this, you still you're at ground zero when you show up. It doesn't matter whether you're 5-star, 3-star, or anything. When you show up, you got to earn your place just like everybody else. And so I think this is an interesting comment. Wide receiver and D-line recruiting aren't cutting it. I was talking to some people about this, and here's how I feel about this class, Chris. I feel like Notre Dame has taken what I call a whole bunch of projectable guys, right? And what I mean by that is they're guys that maybe aren't as polished at this point, maybe haven't developed their bodies physically as much as, some 5-star, but you see the huge upside of a lot of these guys. And me, I want the best of the best, just like everybody else. But I kind of get it in a way that if you can't get those guys, I'd much rather have somebody who's got big upside than somebody who's just kind of a middle of the pack but a pretty steady player, because you're just not going to win playoff games with people like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the other part of that is with the transfer portal right now, and the way that things are, if these projectable guys don't cut it, they're going to be gone. In the past, those projectable guys, if they didn't cut it, they were an anchor on the program for 4 or 5 years.
Yes.
So that, I think, is why it may make a little bit more sense to take some of these projectable guys. But gosh, Chris, I mean, when I look at the commitments and things like this, and I look at a guy like Sean Terry, I get it, man. I understand. I think he's a really talented player. When I look at a guy like Dom Hulak, and I'm like, man, this guy is a relentless football player, just a darn good football player. He's not quite, you want him, you'd love him to be 6'4", 6'5", but he's all of 6'3", and he's got extremely long arms. Same thing with Koakia, guys who can be third down pass rushers. So you like that. You look at a Chris Burgess, and, I'll be the first to say when I watch his film, I don't see a dominant player, but at times I see a very dominant player, and then I see a body that you're like, wow, if you guys can develop this body and make him the player that he can be, holy crap, could he be very good. You and I have talked about Ethan Long as a safety and how it doesn't, like, when you watch his film, it doesn't look like he's running a million miles an hour, but the more you watch it, you understand it's not that he's not doing it because he can't. He's a very cerebral player where
Mm-hmm.
he dissects everything on the field and then puts himself in a good position to make the play versus overrunning a play or versus, running with his hair on fire and not having proper tackling technique. He just seems like a smart football player that has the ability, because you see it flash on film. You just don't see it every single play. And so the more you kind of dive into it, I think I understand why they've done some of the things they've done and taken some of these guys they have. Um, even a Meadows, when you look at Meadows and you see his tape, you say, okay, pretty good player, but it's 2 minutes long. It's not 9 minutes long like some of these other guys. And the reason why is he wasn't doing it. There weren't plays being made. And so that's kind of a question. He, looks great on film and he can run and he can catch, but where's the production on the film, on the film? And it's not that he can't catch touchdowns. We've seen it. It's not that he can't run away from a lot of people. We've seen that on film. It's just we don't see him doing it over and over and over like a lot of the great players that we've seen in the past. And so, but boy, the talent is just sky high. I mean, I think his potential is good as anybody they've had in a long time. He could be a better version of Samardzija easily. He really could be.
That's
And
saying so much too.
it really is. I mean, he's faster than Samardzija. He is,
Yeah.
but he's got that kind of size and he's a little bit shiftier. When in open space. He's not as thick as Samardzija was, and later became, but I think he can be that kind of a player, definitely. So, but you got to develop that. So, let's see. People have been asking about this. Is Notre Dame recruiting more bigger body defensive tackles? And this is a question that I have too. And I realize some of these guys are going to grow, but man, when you watch a Georgia, Chris, and you watch Alabama, they got so many of those dudes that are 330 pounds, and they can just roll one right after another in there. And Notre Dame just, they're lucky to get to 310 on all these guys. If they can get a guy to 310, it's almost a miracle. And I'm all for fast twitch dudes that can, hey, look, if you can get in space and you can shoot gaps and create plays behind the line of scrimmage, I'm all for that, right? That's a great thing. But at the end of the day, if you go against big time offensive line, you're going to have to be able to hold up against a run. And to me, that's a question and concern I have. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, no, I mean, you just what, like you said, you watch the playoff and you see, it seems like every team has some giant guy in there that, Sean McDonough's going on and telling you about how big he is and how big his pants are or whatever. And like you
Yeah,
said, those guys just clog things up in the middle, and you kind of need, like, I mean, they call them like stuffers, right? Like, they stuff the middle and run stuffers. I mean, when you're getting there and it gets down to it, and a team, I mean, look how Michigan did it, right? At the end of the day, they're just running down your throat over and over and over again. And you need some guys in there that are going to be able to stand up to that and force you to do something else. When you're playing those elite teams in the end, Notre Dame's defense has been stellar of late. But you do wonder what's going to happen if they get, and maybe not so much this year, but in the future, when they get against somebody like that who's able to kind of just lean on you for 4 quarters over and
yeah.
over again. So yeah, it is important to get some in, like you said, Mike. These guys are gonna grow, they're gonna put on pounds, but sometimes you need those guys that are just naturally big like that.
Yeah, exactly. And just have that big lower base to anchor down there. And like a guy like Riley Mills, I love the guy, and he's 300 plus pounds, and that's great. And certainly for a defensive tackle, but at 6'6", it's hard for him to kind of anchor because he's just so darn tall. It's hard to get lower than the man in front of you because you're so tall. And it's not that he can't do it, but sometimes when they're 6'6", it's just hard to be able to get down and bend and get lower than the man in front of you. So, um, yeah, we'll see. I will say this too, and I don't mean this in a negative way. I'm just saying this in general. Uh, I've been covering recruiting for 25 years, and it has always been defensive linemen have always probably struggled the most academically to get into Notre Dame. There's for whatever reason, it seems like offensive linemen usually it's not a problem academically. They're usually the smartest group out of the class that comes in. But defensive linemen, a lot of times there's been a lot of guys that were close on the border and they couldn't get in, and for whatever reason. And I think that happens. It's hard to qualify some of those guys. There's bodies out there, maybe some guys who may even be interested, but if they don't have the academics, it really doesn't matter. And again, I think it's just been my experience in the 25 years of doing this that there's that's a position that a lot of times they struggle with academically. So, all right, and another guy makes a comment about no real edge. If Shanklin isn't there, who's your defensive end? Who's your rush end here at this place? And look, that's a concern, Chris. I mean, to me, I think you kind of screwed up here. You need a pass rusher. You do, and I think Dom Hulick can be that guy. I really do. I think he can be that kind of guy, and that's exciting. But you know, you don't know that until he gets here. He's undersized. He's kind of a tweener. But he's going to be 250 by the time he gets here. I think he's just got that big lower base. So I think he's a guy who can play at this level and do it. But to me, I want to see. I would love to see another rush end, and it's disappointing that they didn't. There's nobody out there now. The thing that people need to understand too is, if you remember the last couple of classes, the guys that you think you're going to get right about now, that changes a lot of times. Like if we looked at the class and in early April last year, and we started looking at it and said, oh, okay, well, I think they're going to, they got a good shot at this guy. I think they'll get this guy. A lot of that changed, especially, I mean, some of the guys didn't even visit, they didn't even come back for an official visit. So a lot can change. May rolls around and they go out and they start looking again at some players. And we got to hope that they can find somebody, Chris, because I think an edge is a very important position that they need to recruit. Thoughts
Yeah,
there?
and yeah, you kind of hit it there with the Shanklin being a big loss if that's the way it pans out. Because I mean, I think he's the guy they were counting on, especially at certain points in this process, in this cycle. He was the guy they were like, okay, we'll have him there, and if you don't have him there, now you are kind of scrambling. But like I said before, and like you just kind of hinted at, like this staff has proven to be pretty good at adjusting on the fly. You might not know it if you're talking to them at the time because they aren't shy about expressing frustration. So they're probably frustrated with this whole situation, but they'll find something to address the needs because as much as we know what the needs are, trust me, they know it as well.
Somebody mentions here, Chris, take 28, stop with the 21 man classes. I look, man, I agree. I I don't know if you take 28, but I'd take 27 for sure, and then just figure it out. And I think there's an opportunity. That's 8 more guys. Plus, there's always one who shakes out later. Leaves the class somehow. So I hope they continue, and I would love to see them take 27 and then have opportunities to take one more if somebody shakes out and leaves. Your thoughts
The
there?
other thing to mention there, right? You talk about the transfer portal and how important it is on that going out, right? So in terms of like you said, you miss on a guy before and that's an anchor and it weighs down your roster for years. Now that guy's like, man, I'm gonna go to Western Kentucky and play or whatever it is. I don't think Notre Dame's going to be as aggressive on transfers coming in. I think they're going to obviously you have to use the transfer portal. They're not going to do a Dabo Sweeney or anything like that, but they're going to be very targeted with it. So the thought is, we've recruited this level for this many years now. It's our time. The guys we recruited, it's their time to take over this program and lead this team. And we'll see how well we actually did evaluating guys. So while those guys may be leaving out, I don't think they intend on bringing as many guys in, which then in turn allows you to be a little bit more aggressive on the front end when it comes to high school recruiting, where you can, like you said, maybe take 27 with the thought that, if it doesn't work out, some of these guys will be gone and we're not going to have to replace them with other people to stay at that 85 limit. So it makes sense.
I see my good buddy here, Greg Wasserman, is asking, is ND going to take 5 linebackers in 25? Seems like a lot. I don't know if they'll take 5, but they certainly could. And again, I think it depends on where Kia and Dom Hulak end up playing.
Yeah.
Is it are they all going to be linebackers? Is some of them going to move to edge? I think that there's certainly a possibility of that. So I'm sure they're going to take at least one more, and I think it depends on who the 5th one would be. I think if it's somebody you just can't pass up, you just take them. You just take them.
If you
And
get
then,
Gavin Nix, like I would expect him to get, and then Owusu Boateng wants to come in, you're taking 5.
You're taking him, yeah, or Ferramo, definitely. Yeah. And Was, I hope I hope the medical stuff's going okay for you, buddy. I hope that's all good for you, my friend. Let's see. Processing May and dropping Marco Jones was unacceptable. Yeah, I don't know. What are you going to do? It just, again, you just never know how this is all going to work out. You just never know how all this is going to work. I thought the May thing was something that you took him fast. And I think, to be honest with you, I think if truth be known, I'm not sure they would have taken May's commitment that quickly, but he was such a good friend with Deuce, that how do you turn him down? I think that may have had just as much to do with it as anything, because he really had only been up the one time. There wasn't a whole lot of communication. And so kind of reminds me of who was the lineman from Arizona that committed real quick and then bounced out of the class and went to USC. It was last year or 2 years ago, or was it last year? It was in the Jugasaw class, or what the heck's his name?
Drawing a blank.
Yeah, I can't remember, but he was from Arizona. But same situation, kind of a late guy that they offered. I really liked his film. I thought he was a really talented player. He committed, and then didn't really know any of the guys because he just was kind of new. And then I don't think Notre Dame's O-line coach at the time did a very good job of making him feel welcome and wanted, and USC got in there and stole him. And we'll see whether he turns out to be a pretty good player, but I know the guy could move really well. So very, very good pass blocker. All right. The next 2025 commitment is Chris. What do you think?
Yeah, is that I agree. I think if I had to guess, I would say either Nix or Zachary.
Yeah. Interesting.
Those would be my guess.
Well, I'd be happy with either one of those. I'd be happy with either one of those. Certainly, Zachary, I just think is so very, very important, and I like Nix as a player. There's no question about that. I you know I don't really see anybody kind of sneaking up on us. Do you? Yeah, I don't think there's anybody left on the board that would sneak up on
No,
us. Yeah, like Saka
no,
did.
I don't think so. I don't think exactly. I don't think that there's anybody that's quite in that position. And we talked about before, when you get to this point in the calendar, usually might as well go ahead and take some official visits. I mentioned Zachary and Nix. I mean, those are guys I could see. I mean, Nix mentioned that he could make a decision before he takes his official visit, so you have to take that seriously. And by all accounts, at this point, it seems like Notre Dame's the team to beat. I don't know if I'm, you know, I don't know if I feel comfortable calling him the leader, but people close to him and on both sides of the equation have pretty much told me that. So, and Zachary, he's a kid that just I don't want to say the process seems like it's dragging on him because he's handling it so well. But basketball has been such a big part of his, this whole process. It takes so much time. He hasn't really had a chance to get out there and see a ton of stuff. I feel like he feels if he had been able to do that earlier, he would have it's like his due diligence would be done. But I don't. I just think Notre Dame's the place for him. I think he senses that. I think Notre Dame senses that. So he's a guy that wouldn't shock me if he kind of pulled the trigger.
Uh,
I don't see anybody else really though.
all right, Mike. We all know you love yourself some offensive linemen. Name your top 5 linemen in your lifetime. It can be a player who wasn't great, but you really enjoyed watching or being around. Well, there's a lot of those guys. Certainly, most people know Sean Milligan and I are very good friends, and love the guy to death, and he's tremendous. And I think he would have been one of those guys that could have been a really great player, but ended up with the back injury, and that kind of hurt, and really ended his career 2 years too early, unfortunately. But that's just the way it is. But I mean, for me. It's hard to go back. It's hard to go all the way back to the Holtz days and say, you know, was Aaron Taylor better than say a Ryan Harris? I don't know. I was young. I was, you know, I mean Aaron Taylor's my age. You know what I mean? So he's my age, and I know Aaron very well, and I think he was a tremendous player. But I was 18 when he was 18. So it was like, it's hard. I remember watching him. I remember watching all the Holtz players. And I will say I was not as educated, especially about offensive line play, as I am today. And I'm not saying I'm extremely educated as an offensive line guy either. It's just a position I love because of the toughness of it. So for me, I mean, Zach Martin is by far my number one. I mean, that's just the guy was just a machine. He was an absolute machine, and I love Q Nelson. I think he was an absolute stud too, and his blocks were more dominating. It's just Zach Martin was the most consistent player. That I mean, he was just so darn consistent that it's hard to take a Q Nelson and put him above him. I mean, when you don't allow a sack for a couple years straight, I mean, what are you gonna do? Or actually, I don't think he ever allowed a sack in his entire career at Notre Dame.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was something crazy stat like that. So I mean, you can't do better than that. And he was a dominant run blocker. And the thing that people don't remember about that offensive line is back then, it was him and Q. Well, they could not run to the other side. They could not run to the other side because they had a couple guys on the other side who just couldn't hold their point of attack. So literally, I would say 85 to 90% of the running plays went behind those two guys because they had to. They didn't have anywhere else they could run the football. So those two would certainly be, my tops. And again, I know that there's a couple Holtz guys who belong in there. I'm certain of that. But I also thought Ronnie Stanley, when healthy and focused, was an elite player, and I think he's proven that in the NFL. Not the most dominant run blocker, but as a pass protector, he's tremendous. And of course, how do you not put Joe Alt in that mix? Certainly. I'm just trying to think of somebody else that I would say. I don't know. That's I'd have to think about it, but yeah. All right, let's see what else we have here for questions. All right. I actually think Sean Terry's going to be a great player, Peter Warwick type. Certainly very similar as far as the ability to make people miss. There's no question about that. I'm not sure he has the top end speed of Peter Warwick. I'm not sure he has that. I do think it's something that Sean Terry can develop and become faster. I think he has the ability to add some strength in his lower body, which will help him become a pretty amazing player. But I remember watching Peter Warwick on film and just being like, "Holy crap! I hope Notre Dame doesn't have to try and defend this guy." It is kind of interesting because Peter Warwick never quite lived up to what a lot of people thought he would. He was kind of a Travis Minor type, a guy who was a pretty solid player, but nothing amazing. But boy, you watch his high school film, you're like, holy crap. Speaking of which, Chris, if you think about all the film that you've watched, who are some of the guys that just totally blew your mind?
I mean, I think Reggie Bush and Noel Devine, their high school films,
yes,
unbelievable.
Noel
that was
Devine.
like an underground. That was like an underground snuff film.
Oh my! It really was. I mean, you put that thing on, and you're just like, I mean, it was just like it was like the guy was playing in a video game. You know what I mean?
Like beyond that, like a bad video game. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, how like if you were good at say Madden, you could just totally dominate the game. That's the way he was. I mean, It was incredible. I'll tell you, Ronald Curry.
I know
he was amazing.
Aren't you a big Matt Holliday?
Oh my gosh. Oh, Matt Holliday he could have been an amazing quarterback. I mean, NFL. I mean, he obviously did pretty well in the Major League Baseball, and I think he'll be in the Hall of Fame. It's one of those things where he did pretty well. But I'm telling you, folks, I have never seen somebody throw the deep ball like Matt Holliday. I used to call him the Mad Bomber. This dude, he was just, and you'd watch his highlight film, and like 40 of the touchdowns were, over 40 yards, just beautiful thrown balls, just absolutely on the money, perfectly thrown footballs. And it's just like, how does a guy do that? It's insane. Who was the guy who, quarterback got busted for beating the dogs, the dog fighting, that guy's film. Michael Vick, his film was outstanding. Unbelievable. It was crazy because I remember nobody knew about Michael Vick. Nobody knew about him. Ronald Curry was the guy. And I remember talking to Bob Kamel, and I had found him, and a couple of friends of mine that were in the business said, "Oh, you got to watch this kid's tape." And so I remember talking to Bob Kamel and saying, "Hey, have you heard about this kid?" And then all of a sudden, this kid just blew up, but didn't get quite as many offers as say Ronald Curry. But everybody knew, and they were from the same town. I think it was Hampton, Virginia, where both of them were from. And it was funny because Ronald Curry never quite, made out to be what a lot of people thought he would be either. So anyway, I think Reef will go up in the rankings. Ask any of the coaches that play against Hulock how good he is. They all say he's a good football player. They're betting on their evaluations and development. First of all, I agree. I think Reef's going to be a stud. I love his film. I think he's going to be big time. And look, you take Dom Hulick because he's got those long arms, and that dude plays football. All right? That guy plays football like it's 1955, and I want those guys on my team. If nothing else, I want him running down the field on kickoff. You know what I mean? That guy's going to destroy a ton of people. He's just a mean kid, and I like that. Notre Dame used to get a lot of those, kind of Chicago kids that were really tough and played with their hair on fire. And he's one of those kids. You got to take him. So we'll see what happens. So, all right. Let's see if there's any other questions here, folks. If you have questions, make sure you put them in the chat. We're here to answer them all and do what we can. I know that there's a lot of kind of conversations you guys are having amongst each other, which is certainly the whole point of this. But if you have any questions for Christian and I, feel free to post them in there, and we'll answer them. I keep looking through them. Regarding Meadows, Bishop Gorman is loaded, and there are upperclassmen in front of him. He's going to explode next year in high school. Go Irish! Yeah, no, I think that that's true, and I know that they had some talented players in front of him, but there's a lot of guys that I guess somebody that talented I would think would make more plays. I think you would see
Mhm.
uh, more plays. All right, interesting. A guy said he'd put Jalen Smith over Manti. What do you think of that? Would you? Would you take Jalen Smith over Manti?
I don't think so, but I can see it. So, and like I think about when you say Jalen Smith to me, the first thing that comes to mind to me is his performance at the opening, where it's 7-on-7, and like he was like a big deal. Linebackers don't do anything in 7-on-7. It's not a it's not a game for linebackers,
No,
and he was the
no,
best player on the field all the time.
yeah,
So that's what I think about, and then that translated when he got to Notre Dame, just an electric player. Where Manti was, obviously phenomenal as well, but more kind of dependable, but kind of more like the very good, almost a parallel to what you're talking about with Zach Martin and Quentin Nelson, where Jalen
yeah.
had kind of those flash plays, but Manti was kind of the dependable. He was like an eraser, right? Like linebackers like them, I love. You just need him to get to the ball. There's no like, is he going to tackle him or not? It's just like they go right down. So I would go Manti, but I see it.
I could see it too. I think you said it best with Jalen. I think he was a splash player. And you look at his athleticism, and it was off the charts. I would say he's probably either him or Wu were the two crazy. To me, I'd probably take Wu over both those guys myself. I just think that once he finally got things together, I think he was a more destructive player. He was just a tremendous player. I think that Jalen was, his last year he was dominant, but so was Manti. I mean, Manti was
Yep.
just dominant too. So, but if I had to take a guy, it's crazy because if Wu would have come in and would have been 20 pounds heavier and knew how to play linebacker, I think he would have just been, well, what he's doing in the NFL right now. We would have saw more of that, but he had too far to go. But I think talent wise, he was just as good as Jalen as far as physically and athletically. Interesting. We kicked out Owen Waffle out of the class. That was a terrible move. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, it's hard to go in. I mean, it takes some chutzpah to go in and offer the younger brother on St. Patrick's Day.
I have a
Um,
feeling he's not going to
so,
visit. They won't see him again. Maybe they
so
will. Maybe
I
they
mean,
will. But
yeah,
I don't know. That was
I mean,
I never understood that. I never understood that. But I thought the guy was a good player. I understand he was never going to be 330 pounds or whatever. But and you took a guy who came in at 330 pounds, but it was not 330 pounds of good weight. And a guy who needs certainly needs some coaching. And so I don't know. Um, I would have tried to keep both myself. I really would have. I think both, you knew you were going to get a good player, if nothing else, with Owen Waffle. He was going to be a good player. Would he be a dominant player? I don't know, but I certainly would have considered keeping him myself. But all right, let's see if we have any more here. All right, folks. If you have any more questions, fire them up here. Our hour is almost up, but we wanted to get in as many as we can. All right. Is Christian Jones from Nebraska still a possibility? Um, I'm going to guess no. I don't know that for a fact, but I do think that they're further down the road with a lot of people. And let's be honest, that's going to be a tough sell anyway. It just is. His dad was a player at Nebraska. Um, I mean, if you go like to say the family Facebook page, you see his dad. I mean, everybody's dressed in Nebraska stuff all the time. It's going to be a very difficult pull. And I'll tell you this, I think the guy's a tremendous player, and I think he's going to be a really good player at Nebraska if that's where he ends up. Um, I, I wouldn't pass on him because I just know enough about him. He's a lot like Hulock in that he's just, man, that dude plays hard, and I mean hard, and it is important to him, very very important to him. I would not pass on him, but I think Notre Dame probably will or may, because they just have so many other guys that are out there. I think he's.
I
I
also
think.
think
Go ahead.
he's the kind of guy that would be respectful enough to give them a straight answer. Right. He also
Yeah.
has a good relationship with the Rezacs. So if they were saying, "Hey, we got a guy here who might be coming on board," or we need to know, not know if you're coming in, but where do we stand here? Do we have a shot? He seems like the kind of kid that would play it straight with them and not just say, "Oh yeah, 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 yeah." So I wouldn't be stunned if that was kind of the case.
Hot take. I think Deuce Knight is overrated and will be a gigantic project. What do you think of that hot take?
So I have my 15-year-old son here in the room, and he's a huge Deuce Knight fan. And if I were to tell him that somebody thinks Deuce Knight's going to be overrated, he would probably text me Deuce's 12-minute highlight film or whatever it is. So just an electric player. Kind of a boomer bust guy, it seems like, right? Like, could if you told me, would I be absolutely stunned if Deuce Knight didn't turn into be the player that, Notre Dame fans are hoping? No. Kind of probably doesn't have as high a floor as a guy like a CJ Carr, but man, I've got one of my best friends is a quarterback guru, like legitimately, and he loves Deuce Knight, and he says if Notre Dame can't develop that guy into a quarterback, then there's something wrong with Notre Dame.
Well, first question is, Shay, how does it feel to be a lot better looking than your dad and also a better athlete?
He can't hear.
You can't hear
Thankfully,
me?
no,
Okay.
no.
Well, he is a lot better looking than you. There's no doubt about that.
I'll give him
And a
that.
better athlete. And no, he's a better athlete too.
Better baseball player. That's it.
A better athlete. My
Yeah,
take on Deuce
you can
Knight.
see this kid. If you saw this kid play basketball, you wouldn't say anything.
Well, that's all right. I was terrible at basketball too. I love the game, but I am awful, awful. All right. My take on Deuce. I agree with you. You take Deuce Knight because his ceiling is astronomical. He reminds me so much of Deshaun Kaiser, but a better version of Deshaun Kaiser. And Deshaun Kaiser was taken in the second round, even though he didn't play well his set last year, and even though people knew some things about him and his personality, that people were questioning about. Again, these are things that you allegedly hear, but the physical attributes are off the chart. And with Deuce Knight, it's absolutely that. It certainly is. And Notre Dame's smart about it. You take a guy like CJ Carr because his floor is so high that you're going to have somebody who can get you to the playoffs, probably win some playoff games. Is he good enough to win you a championship? I don't know. But he's good enough to get you in the mix and good enough to win a playoff game. I think he's that kind of a quarterback, that caliber. But you want to take a Deuce after that because you want to take somebody who it's like, well, boy, if we could develop this guy, you darn right he can win us a national championship. And that's what he can bring you. And you follow him up with a guy like Noah Grubbs or a Brady Hart, another very high ceiling guys, or high floor guys, just like CJ Carr, that you're going to get a very, very good player. And if that's the case, I love that. That's absolutely what you want to do. You shoot for the moon when you can, because he's the shoot for the moon guy, and I love his potential. I think he can be a really good player for Notre Dame. You just got to develop it. And look, folks, I mean, when you look at the LSU quarterback, I mean, nobody was beating down Jaden Daniels' door when he was a transfer prospect. Nobody wanted. I shouldn't say nobody. Obviously, LSU did, but it wasn't like some bidding war. This wasn't Sam Hartman or even Riley Leonard. This was just a guy that was on the trash heap that was trying to find an opportunity, and they did a pretty good job with him. And so I think that really says what, hopefully we'll see what happens. So
I truly believe CJ Carr can win you a national championship. Like he's gone up a lot in my book recently. I
Yeah.
believe he can win you a national or lead you to a national championship. I think Deuce Knight could win you one, right? Like he could be the guy that
That
is
takes over
he
the
could be
game.
the difference maker. Um,
And those are
yes,
usually the
yes,
guys
very,
who win the game. Those are usually the guys. It's
yeah,
usually one guy that makes a difference in the national championship game. Usually, I mean,
yep,
and
yep.
I hate to say it, but for Michigan, it was probably JJ McCarthy. I mean, he really played really well in that game, and even though he wasn't, um, even though he wasn't amazing, he made the plays at the right time when he needed to. And when you look at Penix, he did not. He just played poorly, and that's why they ended up being terrible. So we'll see. All right, we're gonna see if oh, my buddy Bruce Latimer's in there. Hey, buddy, good to see you. All right, we'll see. Who was the biggest recruiting surprise you have ever seen? What do you think there, Chris?
I don't know what the question is. The question like that committed to Notre Dame that I didn't expect
I
to commit to
assume, yeah, yeah, I
Notre
would
Dame.
assume.
I think Manti. I mean, I don't. I don't think everyone. Obviously, Notre Dame was in it, but like I don't think anybody was really picking Notre Dame going into that. And if you saw the reaction from the Weiss War Room, they weren't either. I would say Manti.
Uh, I'd say the biggest surprise. Well, I shouldn't say it was such a surprise, but the one that went against Notre Dame was the whole Lorenzo Booker thing. Man,
Mm-hmm.
that was just the craziest one ever. Uh, I would say there was a guy from Georgia, um, Mitchell Thomas was his name. He was a
Mm-hmm.
linebacker, and then never in a million years did I think he would end up at Notre Dame, and he did. That was really surprising. I never thought that would be, and he was a heck of a player. Or in high school, didn't pan out at Notre Dame for whatever reason. Yeah, Elijah Page, that was the name of him. All right, who's going to surprise you the most, Mitchell or Colsey? I would say Mitchell's probably going to have the better year for sure. All right, Mike, what was media availability like back in the day when you were in South Bend? It depended on the coach. You know, Charlie gave us more in the spring than he did in the fall. And he didn't give us a whole lot as far as full practices go. Brian Kelly gave us a bunch. I mean, there was one year I think we got 6 open practices in the spring, which was all day, all pro open practices, 6 out of 15, which was tremendous. But really, Brian Kelly gave us a lot of times 3 or 4 in the spring and 3 or 4 in the fall. It seems like Marcus is doing 1 or 2. I think we have 2 this year in spring, and we'll see what happens. Let's see. Oh, Mike, random thought here. I had this week listened to Power Hour years ago. You would have calls with recruits on the show. Dane Christa is a classic that comes to mind. Any reason that tailed off? Well, yeah, we do the Power Hour show during the day. We don't do it at night like we used to. With Jamie and kids, and it's kind of like Christian right now. He's got 3 kids at home, and I don't like to tax my guys and take away from their family time if I don't have to. But we used to do that more. But I try as best I can not to have them on late at night and things like that because they're family men, and uh, as good as Christian is at this job, and I'm being dead serious here. As good as he's been for as an employee and as the recruiting guy for us, he's a better dad. He's probably the one of the best dads I've ever seen, and I'm saying that in
Oh,
all sincerity. I mean, he does everything with his kids all day. I mean, every waking minute that he has the ability, he's out with them, both he and his wife. So, love the guy, and love seeing that. And
yeah, that means a lot, Mike. Thanks.
well, no, it's very true. You're a tremendous dad, and obviously your wife is wonderful too. So, all right, why isn't ND going after Gabe Kaminsky? They need a pass rusher. I think with Kaminsky, I liked him too, but I think he's thin and he's small. He's just Hulak's bigger, and I think that they're similar players, but I think Kaminsky is just smaller. And I felt like Notre Dame felt like if they're going to take somebody like that, you go with the bigger guy. They're very similar players. They really are. And so I liked him. I thought he was a good player, and I bet he goes to Northwestern or somewhere like that, and you know, and has a pretty good career. I don't know where he's. I really haven't followed it since then, but he's a guy that's going to be a pretty good player. All right, how bad does the Holden Stays hurt now? Yeah, it kind of does. Without Eli Raridan available, it definitely hurts. And look, Holden Stays would have been the 11 personnel tight end that they're looking for, and Eli Raridan would be that. Mitchell Evans would be that. We'll see what happens with Cooper Flanagan. Can he be that guy that can get vertical? I don't know. They basically made him thinner. They didn't want him to be as big, and so we'll see what happens with that. But I think he's Holden Stays was a very good player. There's no question, and it would have been nice to have him stick around. But they just got to get Eli Raridan healthy. I'm telling you, man, Eli Raridan has incredible talent. They just got to. He just had terrible luck. It's just been bad luck after bad luck after bad luck. So we'll have to see what happens. All right, folks, we're just going to go an hour again. Like I said, I don't want to keep Christian too far, away from his family, and but we'll try and do this. I don't know if it'll be every week. It depends on what's going on with recruiting. But now that there's a lot going on with recruiting, we'll be doing it more and more for you and everything. So hope you enjoyed that. Again, if you haven't liked or subscribed to the channel, please do. And thanks for coming on. And folks, feel free, to ask questions. We're going to try and make this a audience participation show versus more of a Mike and Christian talking a bunch of crap show. We want to answer your questions and go from there. All right, that's going to be it for us, folks. Thanks, and we'll talk to you soon on the recruiting show from Irish Sports Daily.